From Charlottesville, Virginia, the local vork capital of the world, it's Meet the Farmer TV bringing you the second Local Food Security Summit.
On behalf of the University of Virginia, I'm delighted to welcome you to the second Virginia Food Security Summit.
Locally grown food is going to be the salvation of our country. I would like to see a profusion of universities supporting sustainable agricultural colleges. And we need to provide scholarships for students who would like to go to these schools, ideally 4 years paid for free, so we can generate new generations of sustainable and organic farmers. We need to do this with the same type of energy that we put into our football and basketball teams and all of that other stuff that's non-essential. Food is essential, football is not.
I'm Michael Clark, your host for Meet the Farmer TV. Here we are at the Jefferson Scholars Foundation Hall at UVA, here in Charlottesville, Virginia, known as the locavore capital of the world, according to Forbes magazine. We're here for the second Virginia Food Security Summit. We're here with Deputy Secretary Kathleen Merrigan from the USDA. We've got experts, entrepreneurs, farmers, food people, everything to do with food security that affects us all.
This meeting marks an important milestone in the development of the farm-to-table policy recommendations, a multi-sector plan for strengthening Virginia's food system and economic future. We submit that the rise of the local food movement and the attractiveness of local food systems stems from a fundamental human need to be connected to the land. We cannot live without this connection to the land and to those who grow and produce food. From these essential exchanges come priceless social and cultural benefits. This afternoon, we first will set the national context for the farm-to-table plan, and then move to a discussion of the future for local food systems. Tomorrow, we'll turn to how we get there from here.
Now let's hear from Deputy Secretary Kathleen Merrigan from the USDA, accomplishments in advancing America's food system.
I'm really glad to be here to talk about what's happening in Virginia and how your efforts mesh with the larger goings-on across the country. As you launch Virginia's first statewide strategic food security plan this week, I'd like to give you an overview of USDA's priorities that are responding to America's complex and fast-changing food system. Perhaps first among several urgent issues is what's going on in rural America. Despite some high commodity prices and some farmers are doing well, the reality is not everyone's in that boat. Mid-sized farms are disappearing, and I'll be joined later here with Fred Kirschman on the panel, who's been really a great spokesperson, a wake-up call about the disappearing middle, the family farms that are just not making it in this economy. Elder Leopold warned about a spiritual danger of not owning a farm, believing that breakfast comes from a grocery. And I think now people are starting to take note of that. By 2011, over 85% of consumers polled by the National Groceries Association said they chose grocery stores based in part on whether they stock food from farms in the area. 85%. What does that mean for you in Virginia as you come up with your strategic plan, to know that there is that surge of consumer interest? How do you tap into that? How do you really make that work for your local economy here? As Tanya has said in a recent UVA magazine, when Walmart says they're going to start sourcing some of their food locally, you know there's a trend. To truly advance America's food system, communities have to find a way to institutionalize infrastructure that means lasting change. That's your challenge, isn't it? That's what we're helping them to do, one region and one community at a time with different USDA investments. And we have to figure out how we sync up our funding and determine our priorities. We're supporting approaches like local meat processing, farm-to-school activities, and food hubs. A year ago, I visited the Jefferson Area Board on Aging, an adult daycare center here in Charlottesville. Nice visit there. JABA is showing us how you can really use locally grown food on a daily basis and improve the quality of nutrition for those participating in the daily meal delivery programs. And a key partner in this vision is a local food hub. I see my local food hub folk in the audience, which supplies JABA, schools, hospitals, restaurants, and the USDA cafeteria in Washington, D.C. with locally grown foods. It's more than just about sorting, storing, marketing, distributing. Vital as these services are, it's also about cultivating the next generation of farmers through education. And in just a few years, it's emerged as a model for fostering long-term sustainable development and community engagement through agriculture. Perhaps most important, it shows that local food can mean more than a farmer's market or farm stand, as important as those efforts are. The value chain for these products can be much, much more complex. Local Food Hub buys produce from more than 50 family farms within a 100-mile radius. Forgive me if my information is dated. I'll try to do my best. These aren't direct farm-to-consumer sales, but they fit the definition of a regional food system. In a country where the average farmer gets only 16 cents on the dollar spent at the grocery store, they need to capture the value of local work. They need access to restaurants and schools. Last spring, I announced the findings of a national survey of food hubs USDA conducted with the Wallace Center and the Project for Public Spaces. We identified over 100 food hubs that are operating across the country with average food hub sales of nearly 1 million annually. Each food hub, by our estimate, creates an average of 13 jobs. The median number of small and mid-sized suppliers served by an individual food hub is 40, creating economic opportunity for producers and communities. More than 40% of food hubs are specifically working in food deserts to increase access to fresh, healthy, and local products. And most exciting, over 40% of the food hubs that we surveyed were started by producers and other food entrepreneurs. While USDA has proudly offered support to nearly 30% of the nation's operating food hubs, we're even prouder to find that food hubs are trying hard to become economically self-sufficient and viable on their own. And some just sort of start and they don't even want USDA's help. They want to do it on their own. I'm just here to congratulate you on coming together on the second summit, understanding the real importance of this conversation, this dialogue you're having, and asking you to lift up the best ideas so that I can help champion what Virginia is doing across the country. Thank you very much.
Now let's hear from the roundtable discussion. What's likely, what's desired, and what's the future of our food security and our access to fresh, healthy food?
We have this incredible momentum of this local food movement. Where are we going? Where are we going to be? Is this a flash in the pan, or is this going to stay? And why? So first of all, people talk about a food system. It's important to understand, what are we talking about? I can't tell you how many people ask me, what is a food system? Well, it's all of the elements that go into getting the food from the farm to our mouths. And so that includes the people who grow it, who process it, who prepare it, who distribute it, who retail it, and who eat it. And it's all of that, but let's not forget who also dispose of it. So the cradle to compost. And so that's really what we're talking about when we talk about our food system. It's all of those components. And as we just learned, certain components of that food system are weaker in the local food system. Food security is accepted to be understood as ensuring several things. One is an adequate supply of nutritionally adequate and safe food. And the second piece is, can I get there? So we have the food, but can we get the food? So is it accessible? And then the third piece, is it affordable? So that when I get there and the food is there, can I actually afford it? And when people talk about food, the population, the people who are food insecure, they're talking about people who may not know where their meal is coming from in the next day, the next 3 to 5 days, or may not be able to afford it. This conference, this summit, is really about growing the local food movement. And does it have a future? And where are we going? And how can we make that future happen with this farm-to-table plan that we're launching tomorrow? And the reality is we're in a globalized system. We know there are some people who would say, well, we can eat all local. Well, it's pretty rare that there are people who can eat all local, and we know from people, authors like Mark Kurlansky, author of Salt and other wonderful food books like Cod, has noted that food trade has happened ever since people could move. We started trading salt thousands and thousands of years ago. Trade, it's in our blood. It's probably never going to stop, right? So in this globalized context where trade of food and spices and things we love and adore to eat is not going to stop, what does this localized food movement really mean? What does it mean? And that's really what we're here to talk about.
I am an organic and sustainable farmer. I currently raise commercial meat goats and about 20 to 30 different kinds of organic herbs and vegetables on my farm. I run the farm with the help of my wife, Jeanette, who's sitting back there in the third row, and occasional help of 1 or 2 other people. We've been doing this full-time for the last 6 years. Before that, I spent 25 years here at the good old UVA, working in the hospital in various multiple healthcare disciplines, a lot of which motivated me to really make a conscious effort to eat better. I was already into growing things organically, but when you take care of sick people and dying people for 12 to 13 years at a time, it really touches you in a different way, and you realize the impact that nutrition and food has on each and every one of our lives. I'm here at the request of Virginia State University, who is kind of sponsoring me and asked me to come and do this. They sponsor my farm in a number of different ways, and I support the activities that they have there for our local farmers. And how many people here are farmers, first of all, by show of hands? Great, okay, good. You know, yeah, definitely. Let's give them all a round of applause. You know, it's definitely very true, no farms, no food. So as a farmer and a producer myself, my perspective is going to come totally from that of a producer. Locally grown food is going to be the salvation of our country. And that's not something that I say, I mean that in all seriousness, for a number of reasons. You know, the economy is in shambles. Everyone knows we need food. I think we all know that we need good food. The problem is that there's very little good food left, and there's fewer people producing good food. I am not a proponent of the major corporations, your ADMs and Monsanto and a few others that we all know their names. I think that the challenge that we have in front of us is going to be something that we're going to have to really step up. I mean, we're watching this Occupy Wall Street movement, and I'm kind of curious to see if we might begin something like occupying supermarkets or different things like that in the not too distant future in order to really get the message out. Food is a serious thing. The global part of it is something that disturbs me because, you know, we can't fix all of the problems of the world, and we know that. You have to start close to home and do what you can locally. The first thing you need to do is we need to support your Virginia farmers. And they're advocating spend $10 buying something from a local Virginia farm. How many of you are currently doing that? That's great. Give yourself a round of applause. The rest of you who aren't, it's time to start, because where are you going to get your food from in the next 20 years? If these small farms die out and the mega corporations are able to continue their takeover and annihilation of the small family farms, the genetic diversity, the biodiversity of our seeds, of our animals, and everything that we need to support human life as we know it on this planet Earth will disappear. Period. I mean, we're not playing, it will disappear, it'll be gone. You know, there used to be thousands of varieties of rice, we'll get down to a couple hundred. All the different livestock breeds that are being annihilated by the commercial people who are creating new things that aren't even real anymore. We all know 60 to 70% of the food we eat is genetically modified. You can read as much research as you want, but the bottom line is that the verdict is in, and it's not good for you. We have a choice where we spend our dollars. We have a choice, and it's time that we really stand up and make that choice, and make it loudly enough. Part of the response that we're seeing, the growth of local food movements, is really, it's people-driven. It's not so much driven by the government, which is a good thing, I think. It's people saying, this is what we want. And as encouraging as it is to hear that, 85% of the people are choosing the supermarkets by whether they're supporting local farmers or not, which is great, and I applaud that effort. But what I would rather see is that the local farmers own their own co-ops and cut out the middleman.
Some folks in Sioux City, Iowa, who raise organic food managed to get a pretty nice connection with a Whole Foods store in Omaha. They had a very favorable buyer who started buying their stuff and putting a big display in the front door saying Iowa-grown organic asparagus. It was right when you came in. People started buying it, developing a lot of loyalty to it. And after 6 months of very successful sales, they got a call from the buyer one day who I think had changed, her boss had changed or something, and she said, well, we found a new supplier from Wisconsin. Can you come down $1 a pound on the asparagus price? This is sort of a typical moment a lot of farmers who try to sell the institutional markets often face. In this case, though, the farmers had the presence to say, no, we will not reduce the price. In fact, we'd like to make a deal with you. Would you be willing to keep our asparagus on this display for a week next to the stuff from Wisconsin? Let's see what happens. After a week, the store called up and said, we want your asparagus next week. Because they built so much loyalty with their customers, the customers said, we want to buy from local farms. We like the quality we're getting. We'd rather have Iowa asparagus than Wisconsin. That's, I think, how farmers are going to build that kind of personal loyalty, is how business relationships will form that allow us to flourish in the future. It's already happening, but we don't incentivize those connections the way we incentivize getting big. Secondly, Snowville Creamery in southeast Iowa, in Pomeroy, Ohio, southeast Ohio, they take their skim milk and they use a nanofiltration process to filter that down to a very dense base for ice cream. For a store in Columbus, Ohio called Jenny's Splendid Ice Creams that makes Ohio flavors using Ohio corn, Ohio buttermilk, Ohio strawberries, raspberries. Very inventive ice creams, less sugar than usual, really incredibly high quality. When I interviewed Warren Taylor at Snowville Creamery and Jenny Britton at Jenny's Ice Creams, what they said was, we're on the phone every week with each other. And one of us doesn't grow without the other one knowing that they have the capacity to meet that demand. The ice cream store is not going to take on new stores unless they know the creamery is ready, and vice versa. That kind of cooperation among businesses that could see themselves as competitors, who could see themselves as just rugged individuals fighting out in a tough economy, that's what creates the local stability, the local exchange, the local sort of sense of settling in where a local economy is possible. Those two stories, more than anything I have, really show the potential for where we need to go in terms of really strong local business. In terms of what's really going to happen, I think I've already kind of highlighted what I'd like to say about that. Tax policy in this country probably plays a bigger role than any farm policy we have in shaping our outcomes, because we actually incentivize size because we think that's more efficient, rather than incentivizing the outcomes we'd like to have. Adam Moody is a farmer in Indiana who said he's trying to develop an infrastructure in his business where he gets from, instead of getting $1,000 of value per cow, he'll get $5,000 of value per cow because he owns the entire value chain himself for his beef operation to the retail store. But what he says is we want incentives that actually reward the product the consumer needs rather than getting large.
So what we need to do is redesign agriculture and redesign it in a way so that we are both producing biodiversity and food. And so that we, in fact, can increase the ecosystem services that we not only need for food production, but also have a healthy planet with agriculture. And there are a lot of examples about that. They're mostly small examples, but throughout the planet where farmers are already beginning to do this. And there are also experiments that have been taking place, like at the Land Institute, in terms of perennializing annual crops, which again would, and the concept there is to have perennial polycultures. So again, to have a greater diversity You would have better root systems which restore the biological health of soil. Farmers would have less expenses because they wouldn't have to plant the crop every year. They would plant it maybe every 5 or 6 years, so you have less energy input. Now, there's a lot of research that still needs to be done, but the progress that's been made over the last 30 years at this point looks pretty hopeful. The United Nations has now come out with 4 reports over the last decade or so, and all of them are saying essentially the same thing, that while new technologies are important, they're not the solution to the problem. The solution to the problem has to come by working with local people in their own communities, recognizing their own culture, recognizing their own resources, so that in the developing world, for example, you have to work with women because 70% of the world's population, farmers in the developing world, are women. So these are all the kinds of things, you know, that we have to put on the table as we're looking at these new options. We now currently here in this country, and I haven't checked in other parts of the world, but I would be surprised if it wasn't happening in many other parts of the world too. We now have a new generation of young people that want to do this. And this is where I am privileged to have a close encounter with a number of them in my involvement at the Stone Barns just outside of New York City. We just had our 4th Young Farmer Conference this last week. And as has been true every time we've done this, we opened the registration for this conference on the 15th of September, and we only have room for 220 young people. And by the 28th of September, we already sold out. And we had 90 young people that were on a waiting list in case somebody canceled out so they could come. And this is a group of young people that are smart. Most of them didn't grow up on a farm, but they have gotten experience to some and are looking for more by working on farms, doing internships, all these kinds of things. We have apprentices and internships on our own farms at the Stone Barn Center. They are passionate about what they want to do. All that they need is access to land, access to affordable capital, and access to the kind of markets that can give them the kind of return so they can pay off their investment and have a decent life. Those are issues we can address at least to some extent with public policy. They are issues that we can address by working in communities, as Ken has suggested. And here's another thing that I see that is, again, enormously hopeful and encouraging, and that is that I think the real contribution that the local food movement made, and that for a long time I didn't like the term local because everybody was kind of reducing it to how many miles food travels, which is not the big issue. But what the local food movement did is it turned people from being passive recipients into being active food citizens. And this new movement is emerging now all across the country. And some of my colleagues who are working on this, there's a group particularly on the West Coast and one out here on the East Coast, who are now imagining a global food future in which this global homogenized food system that we've had, which, you know, everything is kind of the same and you get it from wherever you want it, whenever you want it kind of thing, that's gradually going to disappear because it's so energy intensive, et cetera. And what's going to replace it are these networks of food hubs or food sheds, which are not all going to be the same size. They're going to be like watersheds. They're going to be appropriate to their own place. But people, the separation between farmers and consumers is going to start to disappear because everybody will be at the table as food citizens, determining what is going to be a resilient, sustainable food system for their community. And then the basic goal of that is going to be to produce as much of the food as possible by people in the food shed, for people in the food shed, and your exports and your imports are going to be the second priority. And then with all the incredible communication technology that we have now, all of these food sheds are going to be in communication with each other to share information, to learn more from each other, to find out what other people need and what makes sense in terms of trade, rather than free trade being everything. It's going to be determined more from the bottom up in terms of what people actually want and need. And to me, that's a very exciting prospect, for the future.
Has anyone in here ever seen a photo voice or a youth speak? I see a hand in the back. That's when you're able to empower a young person, a youth, a teen, to use either through video or through photography an opportunity to ask something or to almost do a small call to action. And in their photo voice or their youth speak, they were taking pictures of their corner stores and of their playgrounds and of their lack of some of the opportunities that I think a lot of us are privileged to. And in the corner store, for example, the pictures looked like we would expect most corner stores. The question that they posed, though, when they put the picture up of the canned fruits and vegetables was, why can't we have the fresh fruits and vegetables? Or where do we get the fresh fruits and vegetables from? They took various pictures and photographs of the service bar where you typically get your fried foods, your macaroni and cheese, your mashed potatoes. And the question that they asked then was, where are the colors? Why aren't they available here? And then the second question is, who do we look to help bring that to our community? So I think, as far as my crystal ball, I think ending some of those issues would be immediately on the purview. I think as we're able to continue the discussion about chronic disease prevention and food insecurity, a lot of the solutions are the same. I come from a public health perspective where we're looking to increase access to healthy foods to maintain a healthy weight, to make sure that your diet is rich in the nutrients that you need to prevent chronic diseases. But on the other hand, those same foods are diverse and grown locally here in Virginia. And so making that connection and that movement around not just preventing chronic disease and making sure that we're not just speaking a health language, but we're also speaking an access language and ways to alleviate the food deserts. Identifying those is a key component to working towards preventing and combating them. But I think a lot of times we forget to talk the same language and forget, who our partners in this fight really are. I do want to say that the Virginia Food System Council has had a very broad vision of what the Food System Council can do and who the players should be around the table. Education is there, but so is health. And I'm there in a resource capacity. And which ways can we begin to have this same language? So I think my crystal ball would really focus on making sure that we're coordinated in our efforts no matter what we're trying to either encourage or prevent. And I think addressing those health disparities, the things like the food deserts, the lack of access, and I also focus on lack of access to safe places to play. And ways that we're doing that here in Virginia are through things like the Farm to School Work Group. How can we integrate what's being grown locally with what's being served in the schools? And in a lot of times, those schools are very present in food deserts. And then how do we partner that with food assistance programs, like the Child and Adult Care Feeding Program or the Summer Food Program, and integrate those locally grown foods into those types of systems that are not only combating food insecurity, but are also looking to provide healthy, nutritious options. The Healthy and Hunger-Free Kids Act has expanded what we can do to address some of the food insecurity issues. And so I think we're at a great opportunity as people who are passionate about locally grown foods to begin to integrate into the steps that are being planned now with the Department of Education. The Department of Health oversees a wide variety of food assistance programs, and making sure that the message is heard that the emphasis needs to be placed on locally grown foods, since now you're able to purchase fruits and vegetables, and now you're able to purchase for meals rather than snacks. How can we coordinate those efforts and make sure that we're mutually working towards the same goals? Again, our language is different, but what we're working towards is very much the same.
So there you have it, food security for all. Join us next time as we present highlights from Day 2, Farms, Food, Health, and Environment, all the aspects of the 2nd Virginia Food Security Summit. I'm your host, Michael Clark, for Meet the Farmer TV, from the farm to the plate.